I feel like I'm that kid that the parents want you to stay away from in school. Okay, so you guys have been asking me for my 99 pass guides that I've been doing in the past, but like I said in my previous Naxx video, Naxx is very linear, so there's not a lot of super tricky things you do. For the most part, we just do basic rotations and that's it for most of the bosses. But there are some tips that you can do. So this video is basically all the little bits and pieces that I do in Naxx that you can do on some of these bosses to min-max and push your rogue even further that you might not be doing right now. I believe for the LOATHEB trick in particular, I might be the first one to discover it, I'm not sure, but I didn't see anyone else doing this, and as far as I know, no one else had figured out the timing window for this until we were looking at VODs the other day and found this LOATHEB timing window for rogues to do. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed these tips, and as always, if you want to help support me, you want to help support all this free content, you guys notice I rarely ever take sponsors because I've turned down multiple sponsorships already because I didn't feel they were a right fit for me or right fit for you guys. And if you want to help support me on this free content, then you can check out the Sword and Dagger hoodies and t-shirts linked in the description below. All of that helps support classic roguecraft, so thank you. Okay, so this next tip is more of a clarification because people have been asking me this ever since I mentioned it back in my phase 6 weapon guide, but this is about double MSA. So people have been asking me whether the double MSA is proccing off itself, or if two MSA procs at the same time, do you get extra procs, etc, etc. And the answer is I haven't updated the sheet because we found out that it doesn't give you extra procs. So unfortunately, you have two MSAs, they do not give you any extra procs. Okay, so to explain this in better detail, because some people are going to get confused if they have two MSAs and they see it double proccing. Essentially, you have a set rough average of procs per minute. So MSA has a 2 proc per minute per weapon. So each weapon has a 2 proc per minute average base rate. That's before we add in haste, before we add in anything else. So if you look at this log, sometimes you see, hey wait, sometimes he's just proccing MSA once, sometimes he's proccing MSA both at the same time, so it looks like it's proccing off itself, but it's not actually proccing off itself. What happens is one MSA can trigger the other MSA to proc, but it doesn't give you an extra proc. It just uses up part of your already allocated 2 procs per minute per weapon. So essentially that's why you see sometimes you get the double proc, sometimes you don't, sometimes it'll just be 1 proc, but at the end of the day, no extra damage, no extra procs. MSA is still 2 proc per minute per weapon as a base rate. So all the sims are correct, there's no extra additions. Unfortunately, there's no extra procs, no extra damage when it comes to MSA. So essentially, don't take 2 MSAs, guys. There's no reason to have 2 MSAs. You're essentially just wasting the second MSA. You're much better off with just a better offhand weapon in your other slot. Okay, so here's the LOATHEB fight. I want to show you guys the LOATHEB Imminent Doom Vanish. So a lot of people don't know you can vanish this, mostly because we only really just discovered the exact timing for the vanish recently when I was just looking at VODs on stream to try to find out if there was a timing window, and we found it. So let me share it with you guys here because I assume most of you guys don't know about this one. So if you vanish the first Imminent Doom at 8.5 seconds on your DBM timer, you will immune it. And it's only the very first Imminent Doom because every other Doom cast after that has a kind of plus or minus cast time, so it's not exact and you're not going to be able to exactly vanish it every time. But the very first application of Doom is exact. So let me fast forward and I'll show you how I vanish it. Okay, so look at the DBM timer now. When it gets to 8.5 seconds on Inevitable Doom, that's the timing window I'm looking for. So at about 8.7 seconds, right here, you can see I vanish and you immune the Doom completely. So yeah, this is a way you can basically save yourself the Shadow Pot. I still pop the Shadow Pot for safety, but if you're consistent with this, you essentially will never take Doom damage again on the first cast. Alright, one quick note guys, I know that the vanish changes are on PTR, so if those vanish changes do go in, any of the vanish tricks I talk about in this video are going to be way harder to do probably. So just be aware of that. If the vanish changes with the spell batching and things go through to live on Classic, this is going to make it harder to do any of the vanish tricks mentioned in this video. So just keep that in mind. If it goes through that, you can still do it, but it's going to be very, very hard to pull off a lot of these little vanish tricks. Okay guys, so this next tip is all about the LOATHEB gear set. So I know you guys may have heard some rumors or some bad information that the undead slaying set is good on LOATHEB or Thaddius or whatever it is. You do not want to use the undead slaying set. Please do not use it. That set sucks. It's horrible. What you do want to use, if you want to min-max your LOATHEB set, is a darkmantle / hit set. Depending on what pieces of darkmantle you have and what hit set pieces you have, essentially you can min-max. And this is a set that Ra in my Discord put together. So if you're not in my Discord already, it's free to join. You don't have to be a sub or anything. You can come hang out with us and talk theory crafting. Unlike a lot of other streamers and other people out there, I really do try to put in the extra effort to make sure I'm always in my Discord. I'm always answering questions and actually talking to you guys and spitballing ideas. So this set is, I can't take credit for this. Ra is the one that put in a lot of the work for this after we discussed this in the Discord. And he simmed up a bunch of different sets. This is one of the sets he came up with, but it's a darkmantle set mixed with hit essentially. So what you want to do, what you want to play around with is possibly swapping in some darkmantle and then swapping in various pieces of hit depending on where you can fit it in. So because of the crit cap on LOATHEB, every piece of hit you gain is essentially an extra crit because it raises your crit cap. So darkmantle, because it scales as energy, works really well on LOATHEB, and then combine that with sticking in hit pieces where you can on top of that. You can find that sets like this end up somewhere in the round of 40 DPS ahead. So here we have Ra said this was 21 DPS above just his pure hit set, and his pure hit set was already something like, if I remember right, 20 to 30 DPS ahead of his normal PvE gear. So don't be afraid to play around with the sims. I have sims linked on my website as well, but play around with your set depending on what pieces you have. Using darkmantle and hit gear on LOATHEB is the way to go if you want to min-max your LOATHEB. So just be aware of that. If you want to play around with your gear sets on LOATHEB, play around with darkmantle and hit, and find the optimal combo of that based on what pieces you do have. Okay, so now we're going to cover what you can do for Gluth. So there's a sequence of things you can do on Gluth to basically avoid his fears. Now, some people don't know, but the very first fear that Gluth casts, much like the very first LOATHEB cast, is vanishable, but it's not quite as consistent as LOATHEB. LOATHEB always goes out at 8.5 seconds on DBM. For Gluth, I found DBM timer is sometimes give or take a second. It can be a little bit sketchy. Most of the time, if you look at this DBM timer here underneath my energy bar, most of the time the fear will go out at 0, maybe 75% of the time. But the other 25% of the time, either DBM is going to be late by a second on the fear, or if Gluth actually frenzies at the same time he's about to do a fear, his fear gets delayed by a second. So here you're gonna see the timer is almost right, but not quite. I think it goes out 1 second early here. So I missed the vanish window on this one because the fear went out 1 second early here. But luckily I was immune because of Fear Ward. But what you can do for the next following fears is what I'm going to show you as well. So whether you get this vanish on the first fear or not, I recommend you go for it anyway, because you have nothing to really lose if your vanish is up. And most of the time the fear does go out on time for the very first fear cast. Okay, now for the following fears on Gluth, this is kind of like Uro in AQ, in that you can cancel as many fears as possible. So you can World of Forsaken one, and if you are undead, World of Forsaken ahead of time, because World of Forsaken actually has a window of immunity, so you don't actually have to wait till you get feared. So you see here, I'm gonna about to get feared, and then I'm gonna hit World of Forsaken and immune it so that I never actually get feared. So you can actually immune it using the window on World of the Forsaken. So you see here, fear's about to come up, and just before it's due, I hit World of the Forsaken, and I'm just immune when the fear does go out. So it's a little bit of RNG here. If the fear is very late, you can miss the window, but most of the time you're going to get it if you World of the Forsaken just before it comes off cooldown. So you can see I World of the Forsaken this first one, but the following ones is something that anyone can do as well. So you can lip the fear as well. And before, it was actually very RNG or very rough timing to lip the fears, but because DBM added in this raw timer in recent weeks, you guys may remember that there didn't used to be a raw timer, but DBM just added that in. So now you have the raw timer, and it's a window. So it tells you when the window is roughly up, But DBM is actually a little bit wrong. Sometimes it goes out usually sometimes a second ahead of the raw. So the window is actually a little bit bigger than DBM times it, but just to give you an FYI. So essentially at about 1 second on the terrifying raw timer, you want to hit your lip and it will immune to fear. So this is just like Nefarian fear. It's physical based, so you can lip it. So at about 1 second to go, you're gonna see I'm gonna hit this lip here, and this is gonna immune to fear. So if you hit lip roughly just before the fear comes off cooldown, most of the time is going to pop when your lip is on you, and you'll be able to immune the next fear. So between the Vanish, the World Forsaken if you're undead, the PvP trinket if you're not an undead and you need an extra fear breaker, and the lip potion, you're essentially able to spend most of the fight not getting feared, depending on how fast you kill. Okay, so let's talk Thaddius. So notice that in between every polarity shift on Thaddius, you're going to lose your debuff that gives you extra damage. So you see this thing up here in the corner that says 18 stacks. Usually it's around 18, 19 stacks. Depends on how well people are stacking and other factors, but usually it's around 18, 19 stacks at max. And you want to make sure whenever you're using energy to do backstabs, sinister strikes, whatever it is, that you have this debuff on you. Okay, now you don't have to do this, but if you want to min max and you don't want to be lazy, admittedly I sometimes am lazy on this fight as well. If you don't want to be lazy, you should be pooling your energy anytime you don't have the debuff. The exception for this is of course if maybe you're a dagger rogue and you're just screwed most of the fight because you can't spend your energy efficiently because he's facing the wrong way, but that's a whole different issue. So you can see here in between polarity shifts when he casts it and you're waiting for the debuff to apply again, this is when you want to pool your energy if you're not already max energy. So I'm already max energy, so I have to spend energy. But if you're not capping energy, you want to wait for this debuff to come back and then spend your energy if you want to min max the most amount of damage that you can, right? So ideally if I wasn't capping energy, I wait here and then now I see, okay, the debuff is back on me, now I start spending energy again. Okay, so that's just a quick tip for Thaddius for people who might not be playing it the most efficient way possible. Okay, so let's talk Four Horsemen, because this is one of the fights where you really can min-max it a lot, depending on how you want the fight to play out. So, the most important thing for Four Horsemen, firstly, and I'm going to assume that you're doing the burn strat because almost every single guild does the burn strat these days. Even dad guilds are mostly doing the burn strat. So this strat is where you burn Thane first, right? But in my previous video, it was more a general guide, so I taught you the general strategy. But for the min-maxes here, if you have enough HP, so for example, you see I have 7.5k HP here. You need to know how much damage each mark does. So I'll put it on the screen now. This is how much damage each mark does. So if you have more HP than the next mark, you know that you can survive it, which means you don't have to use your pot cooldown. So you can actually min-max your pot cooldown and save it for when you actually need to extend your uptime on the boss and then pop it. So this is something that allows really good guilds, for example, to sometimes they get the extra damage into burn Mograine in one phase. So you see we're going to burn Mograine in one phase here because enough people are min-maxing their DPS and doing this properly. So this isn't even raid team 1 in progress. This is raid team 3 right now. So this isn't all our tip-top DMF buffed race for world first players right now. This is raid team 3 and you can see we're going to one phase both Thane and Mograine here. Okay, so here you can see the pool on Thane. We're just doing our thing as always, but pay attention and notice that I don't use my pot here, and you don't have to, because as long as you know your HP values, you know that you're not going to die before a certain mark. And for almost every guild, most guilds, unless you're a very, very slow guild, you should be able to kill Thane. As long as people are burning your cooldowns appropriately, you should be able to kill Thane without needing to pot, which means you save your pot cooldown to extend a burn on Mograine or Blamau later on in the fight. So you can see here, we're going to burn Thane down. And I think I end up at usually around 3 or 4 stacks of the debuff. And that's never going to kill me as long as I'm coming in here with proper buffs, especially once you have the Zanza pot for extra 500 HP as well. Essentially, you're not going to die here. So you can see I have 3 stacks here, which means I was never in danger of dying, which means I don't blow my pot cooldown. So then I run straight to Mograine because I can, and I DPS him now. So essentially what you're doing is you're extending your burn window on the next guy here. And what you can do here is, it depends on whether your guild is able to one-phase Mograine or not. So if your guild is able to one-phase Mograine here, you can potentially use your pot cooldown here to extend it if you need to. But if your guild isn't able to one-phase Mograine, then you actually want to get out and don't waste your pot cooldown on Mograine. So this is kind of finicky. So because of shield wall, you want to maximize your damage outside of shield wall, right? So if this was a slower guild, if my guild didn't have enough DPS here, if Progress Raid Team 3 didn't have enough DPS to kill Mograine in one on all the melee, then I would run out once I hit too many marks here, because essentially I'm just hitting into shield wall at that point. But because we have enough people staying in, we have enough DPS to burn him down, we're all going to stay in here and burn down Mograine in one phase as well. And the pot just gives you extra safety. So I know I have 7.5k HP right now. My marks are not going to kill me. We can still burn Mograine. It's all still good. So I'm going to stay in. You can see here, I looked at my pot just in case, but I don't need it yet because I have enough HP. So I looked at my pot and then I walk out. So we managed to burn both in 3 marks, which was great. And here's a little secret that you guys may not have noticed. I'll go back. Is if you didn't know, you can actually vanish the marks as well. See, the DBM timer for the marks all goes out at the same time, roughly speaking. So you see the mark of Zalek, I'm gonna vanish the mark of Zalek here. So let's go back a bit. So I had 2 marks here. I'm going to vanish 1 mark when it comes out. So this mark here, I wait for mark of Zalek timer to go out. So when mark of Zalek timer goes down to 0, Mograine also casts his mark, because all the horsemen cast their mark at the same time typically. So you can see I'm going to vanish here and actually immune the 3rd mark. So I'm still sitting on 2 marks here because of that. So that's one thing you can do, is you can also extend your burn window and have less danger by using your vanish at one point in the fight. Now, as far as when you should use your vanish, it completely depends on your guild's clear times. Sometimes I will actually save my vanish for Blamau and try to extend my Blamau time if my guild isn't able to one phase Mograine. So it just kind of depends. You kind of have to play 4 horsemen by ear, but those are the 2 tools that you have. Delay your pot until you actually need it. So know the damage values of each mark. I'll put them up on the screen. So when you get 4 marks, you get this amount of damage. When you get 5 marks, you get this amount of damage. And know that you can vanish 1 mark. So 1 mark can be vanished. Now, the one thing to be careful of is sometimes if you try to vanish a mark just as the mob is dying, the timers can get a little bit messed up. So for example, if I try to vanish on Blamau and she's just died and the next mark is due, sometimes the mark gets delayed coming from Blamau for whatever reason. It seems when they go into ghost form, the marks get out of sync sometimes. But as long as they're alive, the marks seem to always go out on time according to the DBM timer for the mark that you can see below. So I'm going to get another mark now, right? So as long as they're alive, the timer seems very consistent. So those are the 2 tools that you can use to min-max your 4 horsemen here. Okay, so here's one more thing you can do to add a little bit of DPS to most fights in Naxx Rammus. Now, in the past, people know that you can Goblin Sapper charge a raid boss, and they'll give you a little bit of extra damage during the fight. But what a lot of people don't realize is that Goblin Sapper charge triggers a shared cooldown with Dynamite and Holy Water from Stratholme, which is less than the actual cooldown of Goblin Sapper charge. So essentially what you can do is you can Sapper charge, wait the 60-second shared timer cooldown, and then you can throw a dense Dynamite or a Holy Water as well. So if you want to min-max, you can basically add another Dynamite's worth or more, depending on your guild's kill time, to the actual fight damage here. So I'll show you here in a second now. Alright, so I'm going to walk over here and Sapper this guy. So you can see when I Sapper, is going to trigger a 60-second cooldown on my Holy Water and Dense Dynamites. So you can see here, I'm scrolling over 60 seconds. Essentially, I can Goblin Sapper on a boss, wait the 60 seconds, and then throw a Dynamite and Holy Water on top of that. So that's just a way for you to get a little bit extra damage. And just know that going onwards, every 60 seconds, you can throw another Holy Water or another Dense Dynamite. So depending on your fight duration, you can essentially get a whole bunch of extra damage there just for free. And Dense Dynamites are fairly reasonable. They're not quite as expensive as Goblin Sapper charges. Alright, so those are 5 extra min-maxing tips to maybe add a little more fun to your Naxx Rammus runs. I hope you guys are getting good loot. Take care, and if you do want to ask me any questions live or you just want to come say hi, I stream most days at twitch.tv/Snowme. You can come check it out. And as always, if you want to help support me, guys, in any way, I don't put any sponsors that I don't believe in. I've denied a lot of sponsorships and other things in the past because they weren't the right fit for my brand. But if you want to help support anything I do with Classic Roguecraft, all this free content, you can check out my Sword and Dagger hoodies linked in the description below. They come in t-shirts as well. So yeah, thank you as always for the support, guys, and I'll catch you in the next video. Take care.